Tonight, we will explore the most basic truths of Buddhism and Zen. These are not complicated ideas. They are simple observations about life that have brought peace to countless people for thousands of years. Before we begin, feel free to share what time it is and where you're listening from. The Buddha taught that peace is already present within you. These truths we will explore tonight are not foreign concepts you must learn. They are recognitions of what you already know deep down. We are simply remembering together what has always been true. Each truth we encounter will be simple and direct. We will discover these truths through stories of ordinary people who discovered extraordinary peace. You do not need to remember everything or take notes in your mind. These teachings work on their own, like rain soaking into dry earth. Just by hearing them, something shifts inside you, something softens. So settle in. Let your body rest where it is. We will walk together through these basic truths, and in the walking, you may find the peace you have been seeking was here all along. The first basic truth we will explore tonight is perhaps the most immediately useful. It is the truth of non-resistance. This teaching says something simple but profound. When we fight against reality, we create our own suffering. When we learn to flow with what is, we discover a natural peace. This does not mean we become passive. It does not mean we stop trying to improve our lives or help others. Non-resistance is not about giving up. It is about recognizing the difference between wise action and useless struggle, between changing what can be changed and accepting what cannot. Think of water moving through a landscape. Water does not fight the rocks in its path. It flows around them. It finds the natural way through. And yet, over time, water shapes even the hardest stone. This is the power of non-resistance. Not weakness, but a different kind of strength. The Buddha taught that much of our suffering comes from wanting reality to be different than it is. We want the weather to change. We want people to behave differently. We want our bodies to be other than they are. We want the past to have unfolded in another way. And all of this wanting, all of this resistance to what already is, exhausts us. When we resist reality, we divide our energy. Part of us deals with what is actually happening. Part of us fights against the fact that it is happening at all. This divided attention creates stress, confusion, and weariness. We cannot be fully present for life because we are too busy arguing with it. The ancient Zen masters noticed something remarkable. When we stop resisting, when we accept what is here and work skillfully with it, our energy unifies. We can respond with clarity instead of reacting with frustration. We can find creative solutions instead of repeating the same useless struggles. We discover that reality, met with openness instead of resistance, is actually workable. This truth applies to everything. To difficult emotions that we wish would disappear. To circumstances we did not choose. To losses we cannot undo. To changes we cannot prevent. When we stop fighting these realities and start accepting them, we free enormous energy for actually living our lives. Let us explore a story that shows how this understanding can transform even the most difficult work into something flowing and natural. In a river valley many generations ago, there lived a boat captain named Hiroshi who made his living transporting goods up and down the wide river. His boat was sturdy and well maintained. His knowledge of the river's moods was extensive. But every journey exhausted him. The problem was simple. Hiroshi believed that a good captain must control his vessel completely. When the current tried to push his boat off course, he would fight it with all his strength, using poles and oars to force the boat back to his chosen path. When the wind blew from an unhelpful direction, he would strain against it, muscles burning, refusing to let it determine his route. Other captains traveled the same river with less effort, but Hiroshi saw this as laziness. He took pride in his constant vigilance, his refusal to let the river dictate anything. He arrived at each destination drained and sore, but satisfied that he had mastered the water through pure force of will. One autumn morning, Hiroshi found an old sailor sleeping on his boat. The man had white hair and deeply weathered skin. He apologized for trespassing and explained he needed transport downriver to visit a sick friend. Hiroshi agreed to take him, though he was not pleased about having a passenger. The old sailor settled himself at the front of the boat and said little as they pushed off from the dock. The first hour went as usual for Hiroshi. The current pulled to the left, and he strained to keep the boat straight. The wind pushed from behind, threatening to speed them up too much, and he worked hard to maintain his preferred pace. His arms ached. Sweat ran down his back despite the cool morning air. The old sailor watched all this with quiet attention. Finally, he spoke. "Captain, may I ask why you fight the river so hard?" Hiroshi was annoyed by the question. "I do not fight it. I control it. This is what good captains do. We do not let the water push us around." "I see," the sailor said. "And how do you feel at the end of each day?" "Tired," Hiroshi admitted. "This work is demanding, but that is the price of doing it properly." The old sailor was quiet for a while. Then he asked, "Have you ever watched driftwood floating downstream?" "Of course." "Does the driftwood struggle against the current?" "No, it just floats wherever the water takes it." "And yet, it arrives downstream, does it not? Often moving faster than boats and certainly using less effort." Hiroshi snorted. "I am not a piece of wood. I have a destination and a schedule. I cannot just float wherever the river wants to take me." "True," the old sailor agreed. "But have you considered that you might reach your destination by working with the river instead of against it? The river is going to move in certain ways whether you fight it or not. Fighting it costs you energy, but does not actually change the water." Hiroshi wanted to dismiss this idea, but something in the old man's calm voice made him curious. "What do you mean, work with it?" "May I show you?" the sailor asked. "I have spent 50 years on these waters. Perhaps I could guide us for a short distance, and you could observe?" Hiroshi hesitated. He did not like giving up control of his own boat. But his arms were already burning from the morning's effort, and they had a long journey ahead. He handed the pole to the old sailor and moved to the side. What happened next amazed him. The old sailor barely used the pole at all. When the current pushed left, instead of fighting it, he angled the boat slightly to use that push for forward momentum. When the wind blew from behind, he adjusted the sail to let it help rather than hinder. He seemed to be in constant conversation with the water, feeling its movements and responding to them. The boat glided downstream smoothly. They actually moved faster than Hiroshi usually managed with all his straining. And the old sailor looked relaxed, peaceful even. His movements were small and precise, never forced. "How are you doing that?" Hiroshi asked, genuinely puzzled. "I am not fighting the river," the sailor explained. "I am asking it where it wants to go, and then I make small adjustments to guide us toward where we need to be. The river has enormous power. Why would I waste my energy opposing it? Much better to redirect that power, to borrow it for my purposes." He handed the pole back to Hiroshi. "Try it yourself. Feel the current instead of resisting it. When the water pushes, do not push back. Instead, think about how you can use that push to help you." Hiroshi took the pole with uncertainty. His first instinct when the current tugged leftward was to brace and fight. But he remembered the old sailor's words. He let the boat move slightly with the current, then made a small adjustment to redirect that energy forward. It worked. The boat continued in roughly the right direction, and his arms did not strain at all. "Good," the old sailor said. "Now try the same thing with the wind. Stop seeing it as an enemy and start seeing it as a potential helper." For the next hour, Hiroshi experimented with this new approach. Sometimes he made mistakes and they drifted off course. But correcting these errors took far less energy than his usual constant fighting. Gradually, he began to feel what the old sailor meant. The river had its own intelligence, its own way of moving. When he worked with that movement instead of against it, everything became easier. By midday, they had covered more distance than Hiroshi typically managed by this point in a journey. And instead of being exhausted, he felt alert and alive. His body was engaged, but not strained. His mind was focused, but not tense. "This is remarkable," Hiroshi said. "I have been doing this work for 15 years, and I never understood this." The old sailor smiled. "It is not your fault. Many people believe that effort means forcing things. They think if something feels easy, they must be doing it wrong. But nature teaches us something different. Trees do not strain to grow. Rivers do not struggle to flow. Birds do not exhaust themselves to fly. They work with the natural way of things." When they reached the old sailor's destination, Hiroshi helped him to the dock. The man thanked him for the passage, then paused before leaving. "This lesson applies to more than just rivers," he said quietly. "In all of life, we can fight against reality or work with it. Both require energy, but only one brings peace." He smiled and walked slowly toward the village. Hiroshi continued his journey with a completely new understanding. From that day forward, his work transformed. He learned to read the river's moods not as obstacles to overcome, but as information to work with. He discovered that accepting the river's power did not mean surrendering to it. It meant cooperating with it. Other captains began to notice the change. Hiroshi arrived at destinations less exhausted, in better spirits. His boat seemed to glide where others struggled. When they asked his secret, he would tell them about the old sailor and the lesson of non-resistance. Some listened. Some continued to fight the water as Hiroshi once had, believing that real work must feel like constant struggle. But Hiroshi knew differently now. He had discovered that the hardest thing is not forcing reality to bend to your will. The hardest thing is learning to stop fighting and start flowing. And once you learn this, life itself becomes more like a river journey. Still challenging, still requiring skill and attention, but no longer a constant, exhausting battle against forces you cannot change. This story shows us something important about the nature of struggle. Hiroshi believed that a good captain must control everything through force. He thought his exhaustion was proof of proper effort. But the old sailor revealed a different understanding. The river was going to move in certain ways, no matter what Hiroshi did. The current would push. The wind would blow. These were realities he could not change through fighting. All his resistance accomplished was dividing his energy and wearing himself down. When he learned to work with the river instead of against it, Hiroshi discovered he could actually be more effective with less struggle. The goal remained the same. The destination did not change, but his relationship to the journey transformed completely. This is what the Buddha meant by non-resistance. It is not about abandoning our goals or becoming passive. It is about recognizing what we can change and what we cannot. About putting our energy into skillful response rather than useless fighting. In our own lives, we face countless currents and winds. Some we can influence. Many we cannot. The weather will be what it is. Other people will act according to their own nature. The past has already happened. Our bodies age in their own time. These are the rivers we navigate. When we fight these realities, we exhaust ourselves without changing them. When we learn to work with them, accepting what is while still responding skillfully, we discover a natural ease. Not because life becomes easier, but because we stop making it harder than it needs to be. Let us explore another story that shows this truth from a different angle, through the hands of someone who works not with water, but with stone. In a mountain village known for its stone work, there lived a sculptor named Isamu who had trained since childhood in his craft. He could look at a rough block of granite and envision the form hidden inside it. His workshop was filled with partially finished pieces, each one representing his attempt to force his vision into reality. But Isamu struggled in a way his fellow sculptors did not. While they worked steadily and peacefully, producing beautiful pieces, Isamu fought with every stone. He would decide exactly what shape he wanted to create, then battle the stone to make it conform to his plan. He broke many tools this way, cracked many expensive blocks. His hands were covered in scars from chisels slipping when he pushed too hard. The other sculptors would shake their heads watching him work. "The stone will tell you what it wants to become," they would say. "You must listen to it." But Isamu dismissed this as romantic nonsense. Stone did not talk. Stone was simply material to be shaped according to his will. One winter, the village received a commission for a memorial stone to honor the founders of a nearby monastery. This was the largest and most important project in decades. Isamu was chosen to create it because of his technical skill and ambitious vision. He was thrilled and determined to prove himself. The stone arrived at his workshop on a cart pulled by oxen. It was massive, a beautiful piece of dark granite with subtle variations in color. Isamu already knew exactly what he would carve. He had drawn detailed plans showing a complex scene with multiple figures in dramatic poses. He began work immediately, attacking the stone with confidence. But from the first day, problems appeared. The stone had unexpected hard veins running through it. His tools kept catching on these harder sections, jarring his hands and sometimes breaking. The stone chipped in ways he did not intend, ruining lines he had planned carefully. Isamu grew frustrated. He worked longer hours, pushed harder, forced his tools into the resistant stone. His vision was clear in his mind. The stone simply needed to cooperate. Weeks passed. The stone was covered in marks from his efforts, but none of them formed the shapes he intended. The piece looked chaotic, damaged rather than sculpted. Isamu's hands bled from gripping his tools so tightly. His shoulders ached from the constant tension of forcing every cut. An elderly sculptor named Fumiko, who had long since retired from active work, came to visit his workshop one afternoon. She walked slowly around the damaged stone, saying nothing, just observing. "It is not going well," Isamu admitted, his voice tight with frustration. "This stone refuses to accept what I am trying to create." "Show me your plan," Fumiko said quietly. Isamu spread out his detailed drawings. Fumiko studied them carefully, then looked at the stone again. Finally, she spoke. "These drawings are beautiful, but they are not drawings of this stone. They are drawings of the stone you wished you had." Isamu felt anger rise in him. "I am skilled enough to make any stone become what I envision." "Are you?" Fumiko asked gently. "Then why is this one defeating you?" She moved closer to the stone, running her weathered hands over its surface. "This stone has its own nature. See here these hard veins? They run in a particular direction. You are trying to cut across them and they resist you. But if you worked with their direction, they could become beautiful features rather than obstacles." "But that would mean changing my design," Isamu protested. "Yes," Fumiko agreed. "It would mean collaborating with the stone rather than dominating it. Every stone is different. Each one has its own grain, its own character, its own way it wants to split and shape. A sculptor who fights this nature will always struggle. A sculptor who listens to it will find the work flows." She pointed to a section where the stone had chipped in an unplanned way. "See this? You call it a mistake. But look at the texture it created. Look at how the light catches it. This is the stone showing you something. What if this is not an error, but a gift?" Isamu wanted to reject her words, but he was too exhausted to argue. He was failing at the most important commission of his career by doing what he had always done. Maybe it was time to try something different. "What should I do?" he asked, and there was humility in his voice for the first time. "Put away your drawings," Fumiko said. "For 3 days, just study the stone. Do not try to carve anything. Touch it. Walk around it. Notice where it is hard and where it is softer. See where it naturally wants to split. Let it teach you what it might become." Isamu felt impatient with this suggestion, but he agreed. For the next 3 days, he did no carving. He simply spent time with the stone, observing it from different angles, running his hands over its surface, tapping it gently to hear how the sound changed in different places. Slowly, something shifted in his perception. He began to notice things he had been too busy fighting to see. The way certain areas caught the light beautifully. The way the grain suggested natural flowing lines rather than the rigid geometry he had planned. The way that accidental chip actually added interesting depth to one section. By the 3rd day, a completely different vision began to form in his mind. Not the complex scene he had drawn, but something simpler and more powerful. A single figure in a posture of peaceful meditation, positioned so the natural veins in the stone became flowing robes. The areas where the stone was hardest became the stable base. The softer areas where he had already removed material became the contemplative face. When he finally picked up his tools again, everything felt different. Instead of forcing the stone to accept his plan, he made small cuts in response to what the stone revealed. When he encountered a hard vein, instead of battling it, he adjusted his approach to incorporate it. When the stone chipped in an unexpected way, instead of seeing it as failure, he looked for how it might enhance rather than ruin his emerging vision. The work went faster than it ever had before. His tools did not break. His hands did not bleed. The stone seemed to open under his careful attention, revealing the figure that had been waiting inside all along. When the memorial was finally completed and installed at the monastery, people spoke of it with wonder. There was something alive about it, they said. Something that felt less like it had been carved and more like it had been discovered. The stone's natural qualities had become part of the art rather than obstacles to overcome. Fumiko came to see the finished piece. She stood before it for a long time in silence. Finally, she turned to Isamu with tears in her eyes. "Now you understand," she said simply. "The stone was always trying to show you this. You just needed to stop fighting long enough to listen." Isamu's transformation shows us another face of non-resistance. Like Hiroshi with his river, Isamu believed that mastery meant forcing reality to match his vision. He had a clear plan, and he was determined to make the stone conform to it no matter what. But the stone had its own nature, its own grain and veins and character. Isamu's fighting against this nature did not change it. It only broke his tools, damaged the stone, and exhausted him. The stone was what it was, regardless of what he wished it to be. When Fumiko taught him to stop fighting and start listening, everything changed. The goal was still to create something beautiful. The work was still challenging. But instead of battling reality, Isamu learned to collaborate with it. He let the stone's actual nature inform his vision rather than demanding the stone accept his predetermined plan. This is what non-resistance looks like in practice. Not abandoning our creative vision, but holding it lightly enough that reality can shape it. Not giving up on our goals, but remaining flexible about how we reach them. Not becoming passive, but learning the difference between wise action and useless struggle. The memorial Isamu created by working with the stone was more beautiful than what he had planned by working against it. This is often how it goes. When we stop forcing and start flowing, when we accept what is and respond creatively to it, we discover possibilities we could never have imagined through struggle alone. Both Hiroshi and Isamu learned the same essential truth. Reality has its own nature, its own way of being. We can exhaust ourselves fighting this, or we can bring our skill and creativity to working with it. One path leads to constant struggle. The other leads to a natural ease where effort remains but suffering decreases. This is the first basic truth of Buddhism and Zen. Non-resistance. Not as passivity, but as a profound understanding of how to live skillfully with what is. When we stop arguing with reality and start collaborating with it, we discover that life itself becomes our teacher, showing us the way forward if we are willing to listen. There is a concept in Zen Buddhism called beginner's mind. In Japanese, it is called Shoshin. This teaching points to something we often overlook. The mind of a beginner is open, curious, and full of possibilities. The mind of an expert can become closed, assuming it already knows, seeing only what it expects to see. When we approach something for the first time, we pay attention. We look closely. We ask questions. We remain humble in the face of what we do not yet understand. But as we gain experience and knowledge, something strange can happen. We stop looking so carefully. We think we know what we will find before we even look. Our past experience, instead of enriching our seeing, can actually block it. The Buddha taught about this in his own way. He said that clinging to views and opinions creates suffering. When we become attached to our expertise, to our way of understanding things, we close ourselves off from fresh insight. We stop learning because we believe we already know. This does not mean knowledge is worthless or that experience has no value. A surgeon should not approach each operation as a beginner. A bridge builder should not forget everything they have learned. Knowledge and skill are precious. But there is a difference between carrying knowledge lightly and being trapped by it. Beginner's mind means we can hold our expertise without letting it harden into rigid certainty. We can use what we know while remaining open to what we have not yet discovered. We can be skilled without being closed. We can be experienced without being blind. Children often demonstrate beginner's mind naturally. They see things fresh because everything is new to them. They ask questions that seem simple but cut right to the heart of things. They try approaches that experienced people would dismiss as impossible. And sometimes, because they do not know what cannot be done, they do it. The Zen masters teach that we must find our way back to this quality of openness. Not by forgetting what we know, but by holding it more lightly. By remembering that no matter how much we understand, there is always more to see. By staying curious even in familiar territory. By allowing ourselves to be surprised. This teaching brings great freedom. When we release our need to be the expert who knows everything, we can relax. We can admit when we do not understand. We can learn from unexpected sources. We can discover that life is always teaching us something new if we remain open to the lesson. Let us explore a story about a master craftsman who discovered that expertise can become a prison, and how a beginner's innocence opened a door he did not know existed. In a region famous for sword making, there lived a master smith named Takeshi who had devoted 40 years to perfecting his craft. His blades were renowned throughout the land for their strength and balance. Samurai would wait months for one of his swords. His reputation was unmatched. Takeshi knew everything about sword making. He knew which metals to combine and in what proportions. He knew the precise temperature the forge must reach. He knew how many times to fold the steel, at what angle to hammer, how long to temper. He had made hundreds of swords, each one excellent, each one following the traditional methods he had mastered. But lately, something troubled him. His swords were technically perfect, yet they lacked a certain quality he could not name. They were beautiful, but somehow predictable. Strong, but not inspired. He made what he had always made, and it was very good. But it was not new. One spring, a young man named Sora came to Takeshi's workshop asking to become an apprentice. He was the nephew of a wealthy merchant, sent to learn a useful trade. Sora knew nothing about swords or metalwork. He had spent his youth studying poetry and music, subjects his uncle considered impractical. Takeshi accepted him reluctantly. He preferred apprentices who came with basic knowledge, not complete beginners who would require teaching from the very start. But the merchant was an important patron, so Takeshi agreed to take the boy on. For the first months, Takeshi gave Sora only basic tasks: maintaining the forge, organizing tools, preparing materials. The young man performed these duties adequately, but without particular enthusiasm. Takeshi assumed this apprentice would be mediocre at best, someone who would learn enough to be useful but never excel. One afternoon, Takeshi needed to travel to a neighboring village to deliver a commissioned sword. He would be gone for 2 days. Before leaving, he told Sora to practice folding metal. This was a fundamental skill, one that required many repetitions to master. He left the young man with scraps of steel and specific instructions on the traditional folding technique. When Takeshi returned, he found Sora at the workbench, completely absorbed in his task. But something was wrong. The pattern in the metal Sora had created was nothing like what Takeshi had instructed. Instead of the standard straight folds that every smith learned first, Sora had somehow created a flowing, wave-like pattern in the steel. Takeshi's first reaction was anger. "What have you done? I told you to practice the basic fold. This is completely wrong." Sora looked up, confused. "I apologize, Master. I followed your instructions about heating the metal and folding it. But when I folded it the way you described, it felt awkward in my hands. So I tried folding it the way it seemed to want to fold. Like this." He demonstrated, his hands moving in a flowing motion that was nothing like the rigid traditional technique. "That is not how it is done," Takeshi said firmly. "There are proper methods passed down through generations. You cannot just invent your own way." "I understand," Sora said quietly. "I will do it correctly from now on." "Should I throw this piece away?" Takeshi picked up the metal Sora had worked. He was about to toss it aside when something made him pause. The pattern was unusual, yes, but it was also beautiful. The waves in the steel caught the light in a way he had never seen before. There was a fluidity to it, an organic quality that traditional patterns lacked. "How did you do this?" Takeshi asked, his tone shifting from anger to curiosity. "I do not really know," Sora admitted. "I just let my hands move naturally. I remembered watching water flow over rocks in a stream. The way it bends and curves. I thought the metal might want to move like that too." Takeshi studied the piece more carefully. The technique was unconventional, completely outside the traditional methods. But the result was striking. An idea began forming in his mind. What if he forged a blade using this strange pattern Sora had accidentally created? His expert mind immediately raised objections. This was not how things were done. His reputation rested on following proven methods. What if this untested technique produced a weak blade? What if it failed? But his curiosity was stronger than his caution. He decided to try it, just once, in private. He took Sora's piece of patterned steel and incorporated it into a blade he was forging for his own collection, not for a customer. As he worked, Takeshi found himself in unfamiliar territory. The unusual pattern required adjustments to his normal process. He could not simply follow his habitual movements. He had to pay attention in a new way, responding to what this different metal was showing him. The work took longer than usual. Several times he nearly ruined the blade by trying to force his traditional techniques onto this non-traditional material. But gradually, he learned to work with what Sora had created rather than against it. When the sword was complete, Takeshi stood in his workshop staring at it with genuine surprise. It was unlike anything he had ever made. The blade had a living quality to it, as if water had been frozen into steel. The wave pattern caught light and shadow in mesmerizing ways. More importantly, when he tested it, the blade performed beautifully. The unconventional structure had not weakened it. If anything, it seemed to have unique properties. Over the following months, Takeshi continued to experiment with variations on Sora's accidental technique. He combined the young man's intuitive approach with his own decades of knowledge. Together, they developed entirely new methods of forging, approaches that traditional masters would have said were impossible. Word spread about Takeshi's innovative blades. Collectors came from distant regions to see them. Other smiths asked to learn these new techniques. Takeshi's late career work became more celebrated than anything he had done in his 40 years of following traditional methods. One evening, as master and apprentice closed the workshop for the night, Takeshi spoke to Sora with unusual humility. "I need to thank you," he said. "When you came here, I thought I would teach you everything I knew. Instead, you have taught me something I had forgotten." "What is that, master?" Sora asked. "That not knowing can sometimes see what knowing has missed. I was so trapped by the proper way of doing things that I could no longer imagine other possibilities. You, because you did not know the rules, were free to discover something new. My expertise had made me blind to what a beginner could still see." Sora smiled. "But master, I could not have developed these techniques without your knowledge. My beginner's accident would have remained just that, an accident, if you had not known how to refine and perfect it. Perhaps we need both. The beginner's openness and the master's skill." Takeshi nodded slowly. "Yes, I think you are right. I needed to find my beginner's mind again, to approach my craft with fresh eyes even after 40 years. You gave me that gift without knowing you were giving it." From that day forward, Takeshi taught his apprentices differently. Yes, he passed on traditional techniques and accumulated wisdom. But he also encouraged them to experiment, to question, to try approaches that seemed wrong. He learned to value the insights that came from not knowing as much as the expertise that came from long experience. Takeshi's story shows us something important about the trap of expertise. He was genuinely skilled. His 40 years of experience were valuable. But that very mastery had become a limitation. He knew so thoroughly how things should be done that he could no longer see how they might be done differently. Sora, knowing nothing, tried something that seemed natural to him. His hands moved in a way that felt right, uninformed by centuries of tradition telling him this was wrong. And because he did not know it was impossible, he did it. This is the freedom of beginner's mind. Not the superiority of ignorance over knowledge, but the openness that comes from not yet being trapped by fixed ideas. When we approach something as a beginner, we see what is actually there, rather than what we expect to see. We remain curious rather than assuming we already understand. Takeshi's expertise had closed certain doors in his perception. He could make excellent traditional swords, but could not imagine alternatives. Sora's innocence kept those doors open. Together, they created something neither could have achieved alone. The master's skill combined with the beginner's fresh perspective. This teaching invites us to find that quality of openness even in areas where we have experience. To hold our knowledge lightly enough that we can still be surprised. To remember that no matter how much we know, there is always more to discover. To approach even familiar things with curiosity and willingness to see them newly. Let us explore another story that shows this truth from a different angle, through someone whose mastery almost prevented them from learning what a complete beginner knew without trying. In the capital city, there lived a musician named Ayame, who was celebrated as the finest koto player of her generation. The koto is a stringed instrument, long and elegant, requiring years of training to master. Ayame had studied since childhood under the most demanding teachers. Her technique was flawless. Her performances drew crowds from across the region. But Ayame had a secret dissatisfaction. Despite her technical perfection, despite the praise she received, she felt something was missing from her music. It was beautiful, but somehow lifeless. Correct, but not moving. She could play every note precisely as it should be played, but the music did not touch her heart the way she remembered it doing when she was first learning. One spring afternoon, Ayame was walking through a poor neighborhood she rarely visited. As she passed a narrow alley, she heard music. Someone was playing a koto, but playing it badly. Notes were missing. The rhythm was uneven. The technique was awful. Curiosity drew her down the alley. In a small courtyard, she found a little girl, perhaps 6 years old, sitting with a battered old koto. The instrument was missing strings and poorly maintained. The child's hands moved clumsily across it, creating a melody that broke every rule of proper playing. Ayame's first instinct was to correct the child, to show her the proper hand positions and explain the right way to produce each note. But something stopped her. She stood quietly watching instead. The little girl was completely absorbed in her playing. Her face showed pure joy. When she made mistakes, she laughed and tried again. When she found a sound she liked, she repeated it over and over, delighted by the discovery. There was no concern for technique, no worry about playing correctly. She was simply making music in the most immediate and natural way. Ayame found herself mesmerized. The child's playing was technically terrible, yes. But there was something in it that Ayame's perfect performances lacked. A quality of spontaneity, of genuine feeling. The child was not performing music. She was being music. "Excuse me, little one," Ayame said gently. "Who taught you to play?" The girl looked up, startled. "No one taught me. I found this koto in an abandoned house. I liked how it sounded, so I tried to make pretty sounds with it." "Do you know you are playing it incorrectly?" Ayame asked, not unkindly. The girl looked confused. "How can sounds be incorrect? Some sounds I like, some I do not like. So I make the sounds I like. Is there another way?" Ayame sat down next to the child. "There are traditional ways to play, proper techniques, methods passed down through generations." "Oh," the girl said, considering this. "That sounds interesting. But I do not know any of that. I just play what feels good. Like this." She dragged her small fingers across the strings in a way that would horrify any trained musician, creating a cascade of notes that somehow sounded like rain falling on leaves. "That is beautiful," Ayame said, surprised by her own response. "How did you think to do that?" "I did not think," the child replied simply. "I was remembering rain, and I wondered what rain might sound like on the koto. So I tried. Do you play too?" Ayame almost laughed at the question. She was one of the most famous musicians in the city. But she simply said, "Yes, I play." "Will you play something?" the child asked eagerly. Ayame hesitated. She had not brought her instrument. But the child offered the battered koto with such hope that Ayame accepted it. She positioned her hands in the proper way, prepared to play a classical piece she had performed 1,000 times. But sitting in that dusty courtyard with the child watching expectantly, something shifted in Ayame. She found she did not want to demonstrate proper technique. She wanted to play the way the child played, to make sounds that felt good rather than sounds that were correct. It was harder than she expected. Her hands kept falling into trained patterns. Her mind kept judging each note against the standards of perfection she had internalized over decades. But gradually, she let go a little. She tried playing a sound simply because she was curious what it would be like. Then another. Then, a small phrase that had no relation to any traditional piece. The child clapped with delight. That was pretty. It sounded like birds talking to each other. Play more. For the next hour, Ayame did something she had not done since her earliest childhood. She played without trying to play correctly. She experimented. She made mistakes and did not stop to fix them. She followed curiosity instead of rules. The music that emerged was imperfect, unpolished, and unlike anything she had ever performed publicly. And it was alive. When Ayame finally left the courtyard, promising to return with strings to repair the child's koto, her mind was spinning. She had spent decades perfecting her technique, and it had made her into an expert. But that expertise had also created a kind of prison. She had learned so thoroughly what music should sound like that she had forgotten how to discover what it could sound like. That night, alone in her studio, Ayame picked up her own beautiful koto. Instead of practicing her repertoire, she tried playing the way the child played, following feeling instead of form, curiosity instead of correctness. At first, it felt wrong, almost painful. Her trained mind resisted every unconventional choice. But gradually, something began to open in her. A quality of playfulness she had lost. A willingness to be surprised by sound. She started to remember why she had fallen in love with music as a child before all the training and discipline and pursuit of perfection. Over the following months, Ayame's performances began to change. She still played the traditional pieces, still demonstrated her technical mastery. But now there was something else in her music. A spontaneity. A sense that she was discovering the piece as she played it, rather than simply executing what she had memorized. Audiences noticed the difference. They began saying that Ayame's playing had deepened, that it moved them in ways her earlier perfect performances had not. Critics spoke of a new maturity in her work, though they could not quite identify what had changed. Ayame knew what had changed. A 6-year-old child with terrible technique had reminded her of something she had forgotten. That music lives not in perfect execution, but in genuine feeling. That the beginner's openness to discovery is as valuable as the master's accumulated skill. That, sometimes, we need to forget what we know in order to find what we have been missing. She continued to visit the child in the alley, bringing strings and helping to repair the old koto. But these visits were not about teaching the child proper technique. They were about letting the child teach her. About remembering how to approach her art with fresh ears and an open heart. about finding her way back to beginner's mind even after decades of expertise. Ayame's encounter with the child shows us another face of beginner's mind. Like Takeshi, Ayame was genuinely masterful. Her technical skill was real and valuable. But that mastery had calcified into something rigid. She played correctly, but not freely. Perfectly, but not joyfully. The child knew nothing about proper technique, nothing about traditional methods. She simply played with immediate curiosity and delight. And in that innocent approach, she accessed something that Ayame's expertise had obscured: the living heart of music itself. This is not a teaching that says ignorance is better than knowledge. The child's playing was technically poor, and she could benefit from learning proper methods. But Ayame's playing, for all its technical perfection, had become disconnected from genuine feeling. She needed what the child had: the openness to experiment, the willingness to make mistakes, the joy of discovery. Beginner's mind is not about rejecting expertise. It is about keeping our expertise soft instead of letting it harden into rigid certainty. It is about remembering that no matter how skilled we become, there is always more to learn. That fresh perspective can reveal what familiarity has hidden. Ayame found her way back to beginner's mind, not by forgetting her training, but by combining it with childlike openness. She brought her decades of skill to a more playful, curious approach. The result was richer than either alone could have produced. This teaching invites us to notice where our own expertise might have closed us off, where our accumulated knowledge might be preventing us from seeing freshly, where our need to do things correctly might be blocking access to genuine discovery. In those places, can we find our beginner's mind again? Can we approach even familiar territory with curiosity and wonder? Can we hold what we know lightly enough that we can still be surprised? This is the second basic truth of Zen Buddhism: that the beginner's mind remains open to what the expert's mind can no longer see. That fresh eyes reveal what familiar eyes have stopped noticing. That no matter how much we know, approaching life with curiosity and openness allows us to keep learning, keep growing, keep discovering new possibilities in what we thought we already understood. There is a teaching in Zen Buddhism about effort that surprises many people when they first hear it. We live in a world that often tells us more effort is always better. Push harder. Try harder. Never give up. But the Buddha taught something more subtle. He taught about right effort. Effort that is balanced. Neither too much nor too little. Neither straining nor slacking. This teaching is sometimes called the middle way. It came from the Buddha's own experience. Before his awakening, he practiced extreme asceticism. He starved himself. He pushed his body to the edge of death. He believed that enlightenment required this kind of harsh discipline. But he discovered something important. Extreme effort did not bring wisdom. It only brought exhaustion and confusion. Then he remembered something from his childhood. He recalled sitting under a tree, peaceful and alert, his mind naturally settling without any forcing. That memory showed him a different path. Not the extreme of harsh discipline, not the extreme of careless indulgence, but a middle way. Effort that is awake but not strained. Engaged but not desperate. This teaching applies to everything we do. When we try too hard, we create tension that blocks the very thing we seek. A muscle held too tight cannot move smoothly. A mind pushed too hard cannot think clearly. A heart gripped by desperate effort cannot open naturally. But when we do not try at all, when we give up and become passive, nothing moves forward. We stagnate. The sweet spot is right in the middle. Effort that is alive and engaged but also relaxed. Trying that includes allowing. Working that includes trusting. This is the effort that brings peace because it does not create struggle. It does not fight against our own nature. It works with how things actually function instead of imposing force. When we find this balance, everything changes. Work that felt exhausting becomes sustainable. Practice that felt like punishment becomes nourishing. Life that felt like constant battle becomes more like a dance. Not easier necessarily, but more graceful, more natural, more peaceful. The ancient teachers discovered that this balanced effort opens doors that strain cannot force and laziness cannot reach. When we stop pushing too hard or giving up too easily, we discover there is a natural rhythm to how things unfold. A wisdom in knowing when to act and when to rest, when to persist and when to yield. This wisdom comes not from rules, but from paying attention to what actually works. Let us explore a story about someone who learned this truth through the discipline of archery, where the difference between too much and too little effort can mean everything. In a time when archery was both a martial skill and a spiritual practice, there lived a young woman named Hannah who dreamed of becoming a master archer. She came from a farming family with no tradition of martial training, but she had watched the village archers and felt drawn to their discipline and grace. When she was old enough, Hannah sought out a teacher. Master Yoshida was known as one of the finest archers in the province. He accepted students rarely, but something in Hannah's earnest determination moved him. He agreed to teach her. From the first day, Hannah approached her training with fierce intensity. She would arrive at the training ground before dawn and stay until dark. She practiced drawing the bow until her fingers bled. She held difficult postures until her muscles screamed. She pushed herself relentlessly, believing that this kind of harsh effort was what mastery required. But her arrows flew poorly. When she pulled the bowstring, her entire body tensed with strain. Her hands shook from gripping too hard. Her shoulders locked with effort. Her breathing became shallow and tight. The arrows would fly erratically, missing the target by wide margins. Master Yoshida watched this for several weeks without comment. Finally, one morning, he stopped her before she could begin her usual intense practice. "Hannah, come sit with me for a moment," he said gently. They sat together on a wooden bench overlooking the practice field. The morning was calm, birds singing in nearby trees, light filtering through leaves. "Tell me," Master Yoshida said, "when you draw the bow, what are you feeling?" "I am trying my hardest," Hannah said. "I am giving everything I have to make the perfect shot." "Yes, I can see that. And how does it feel in your body when you try this hard?" Hannah considered. "It feels tight, strained. My muscles burn. My breath catches." "And do the arrows fly true when you feel this way?" "No," Hannah admitted, frustration in her voice. "They fly badly. But I thought if I just tried harder, if I pushed through the difficulty, eventually I would succeed." Master Yoshida smiled. "Let me show you something." He picked up his own bow, a simple weapon worn smooth from years of use. He stood, lifted the bow, and drew the string back in one fluid motion. Hannah watched carefully. There was power in his draw, yes. The bow bent under significant force. But Master Yoshida's face was calm, his breathing remained steady. His body looked engaged, but not strained. Then he released, and the arrow flew straight and true to the center of the distant target. "Did you see my effort?" he asked. "Yes, you drew the bow. But did you see strain? Did you see me fighting against myself?" Hannah thought about it. "No. You looked almost relaxed, even while doing something that requires strength." "This is the secret," Master Yoshida said. "The bow requires effort. Real effort. But it requires the right amount of effort, applied in the right way. Too little, and the arrow has no power. Too much, and the body fights itself. The perfect shot comes from effort that is alive, but not desperate. Engaged, but not strained." He handed Hannah his bow. "Now you try. But this time, I want you to draw the string with only half the effort you usually use." Hannah took the bow reluctantly. Half effort seemed like giving up, like not trying hard enough. But she did as her teacher asked. She drew the string back with what felt like too little force. To her surprise, the bow bent properly. And her body, instead of locking up with tension, remained relatively calm. "Now breathe," Master Yoshida said. "Keep breathing naturally. Do not hold your breath." Hannah breathed, and with breath, something softened in her grip. "Now release," he said simply. She let the arrow fly. It did not hit the center of the target, but it flew straighter than any arrow she had shot in weeks of intense training. "How did that feel?" Master Yoshida asked. "Strange," Hannah admitted. "Like I was not trying hard enough. But the arrow flew better." "Yes. Because you were not fighting yourself. Your muscles could work together instead of against each other. This is right effort. Not maximum effort. Not minimal effort. Right effort. Take a breath now. Feel how the breath comes in without force. How it leaves without pushing. This natural rhythm, neither straining nor slacking, this is what right effort feels like." Over the following months, Hannah learned to find this balance. It was harder than simply trying as hard as she could. Maximum effort was easy in a way. You just pushed until you could not push anymore. But right effort required sensitivity, awareness. She had to pay attention to the difference between engaged muscles and tense muscles, between focused mind and desperate mind. Some days she would slip back into her old pattern of straining. Master Yoshida would simply say, "Soften. Breathe. Find the middle." Other days she would overcorrect, becoming too relaxed, and her arrows would have no power. Then he would say, "More alive. More awake. Find the middle." Gradually, Hannah developed a feel for this balance. She learned that the perfect draw was like holding a bird. Grip too tight and you harm it. Too loose and it flies away. Just right, and you can feel its life in your hands without crushing it. Her accuracy improved dramatically. But more than that, her whole relationship to practice changed. Instead of ending each day exhausted and frustrated, she finished energized and peaceful. The practice that had felt like punishment became something she looked forward to. She was still working hard, still developing skill. But the quality of her effort had transformed. One morning, after she had been training for nearly 2 years, Master Yoshida set up a very difficult shot. A small target at great distance, with wind gusting unpredictably. "This shot requires everything you have learned," he said. "But remember, everything you have learned is not about forcing. It is about finding the place where effort and ease meet." Hana stood before the shot, feeling her usual nerves begin to rise. The old instinct to try really hard came rushing back. But she recognized it now. She took a breath. Then another. She felt her feet on the ground. She noticed the wind without fighting it. She drew the bow with power but without strain. Her muscles engaged, but her jaw stayed soft. Her focus was sharp, but her eyes were relaxed. She released. The arrow flew in a perfect arc, adjusting naturally to the wind, and struck the small target dead center. Master Yoshida nodded with satisfaction. "Now you understand. The target was not your enemy. The wind was not your obstacle. Your own excessive effort was the only thing ever standing in your way. Once you found the middle path, once you learned right effort, the arrows could fly as they were meant to fly." Years later, when Hana became a teacher herself, students would often come to her frustrated by their lack of progress. They would tell her they were trying so hard, practicing so much, pushing themselves to the limit. And she would say what Master Yoshida had said to her. "I can see you are trying. But are you trying in a way that helps, or in a way that hinders? Maximum effort is not the same as right effort. Find the place where you are fully engaged, but not strained. Where you are alive and present, but not desperate. That is where skill lives. That is where peace lives. That is the middle way." Hana's journey shows us what right effort looks like in practice. She began with the belief that more effort was always better. She pushed herself to exhaustion, thinking this proved her dedication. But all that strain accomplished was making her body fight itself. Her desperate trying actually prevented success. Master Yoshida taught her something subtle. The bow did require real effort. This was not about being passive or giving up, but it required balanced effort, engaged without being tense, focused without being desperate, strong without being rigid. When Hana learned to find this middle way, everything changed. Not because the work became easier, but because she stopped creating unnecessary difficulty. She stopped fighting herself. Her effort became sustainable, peaceful even, while remaining powerful and effective. This teaching about right effort brings tremendous relief. It means we do not have to push ourselves to exhaustion to be effective. We do not have to create suffering in order to grow. We can work hard, we can practice diligently, while also remaining kind to ourselves, while also breathing, while also allowing. The peace that comes from this understanding is tangible. When we stop straining, the body relaxes even while working. When we find the middle way, effort no longer feels like violence against ourselves. We discover we can be both dedicated and gentle, both persistent and at ease. This is what is possible when we learn the wisdom of right effort. Notice your hands now. Are they gripping anything with unnecessary force? Can you soften just a little while, still maintaining what you need to hold? This small adjustment, this is the middle way in action. Let us explore another story that shows this truth from a different angle, through someone who works not with arrows, but with living things, where too much and too little effort both harm what we are trying to help. In a valley known for its gardens, there lived a woman named Miho, who had recently inherited her grandmother's large garden plot. Her grandmother had been a renowned gardener, and the plot had been beautiful under her care. Miho wanted desperately to honor her grandmother's memory by maintaining the garden just as well. But Miho had never gardened before. She had grown up in the city and knew nothing about plants or soil. All she had was determination and a desire to make her grandmother proud. She threw herself into the work with total commitment. She read every book about gardening she could find. She learned about different plants and their needs. She studied techniques for watering, pruning, fertilizing. Armed with all this knowledge, she began working in the garden every day from sunrise to sunset. Miho watered the plants twice daily, sometimes 3 times if the day seemed dry. She pruned constantly, cutting back any growth that did not match the perfect shapes she had seen in books. She added fertilizer every week, wanting to give the plants every advantage. She pulled every single weed the moment it appeared, keeping the soil immaculate. But the garden did not thrive. In fact, it began to fail. The vegetables grew poorly. The flowers bloomed weakly or not at all. Leaves yellowed. Plants that should have been robust looked sickly. Miho could not understand what was wrong. She was doing everything the book said. She was working harder than anyone could ask. Why was the garden dying? An elderly farmer named Okada, who lived nearby, noticed Miho's struggles. He had known her grandmother and had often admired the garden when the old woman was alive. One afternoon, he walked over to where Miho was frantically trying to save a wilting tomato plant. "May I offer some observations?" he asked gently. Miho looked up, exhausted and near tears. "Please. I am doing everything I can, but nothing is working. I am failing my grandmother's memory." Okada walked slowly through the garden, touching soil, examining plants, taking his time. Finally, he spoke. "You are working very hard. I can see that. But I think you are working too hard. You are loving these plants to death." "What do you mean?" Miho asked. "How can effort be the problem? Should I care less? Do less?" "Not less," Okada said. "Different. Let me show you something." He knelt by the tomato plant Miho had been fussing over. "See how wet this soil is? You are watering too much. The roots are drowning. They need water, yes, but they also need air. Too much water is as harmful as too little." He moved to a row of flowers that Miho had pruned into rigid shapes. "And these? You are cutting them so much that they spend all their energy trying to heal instead of growing and blooming. Some pruning is helpful. Too much is harmful." He scooped up a handful of soil. "And this. You have pulled every weed so thoroughly that you have disturbed the soil constantly. Plants need some stability, some stillness. The soil needs time to settle between disturbances." Miho felt her heart sinking. "So I have been doing everything wrong?" "No," Okada said kindly. "You have been doing many right things but with wrong intensity. Gardening is not about controlling every detail. It is about supporting the plant's own natural growth. They know how to grow. Your job is not to force them, but to provide good conditions and then trust them to do what they naturally do. He could see Miho struggling to understand. Let me ask you something. Did you ever watch your grandmother garden? Yes, when I was very young. Do you remember her working frantically? Constantly doing something to every plant? Miho thought back. No. She worked steadily, but calmly. She would spend time just walking through the garden, observing. Sometimes she would sit on her bench for long periods, just looking at things. Exactly, Okada said. She was paying attention, noticing what each plant needed. Some days a plant needs water. Some days it needs to be left alone. Some days it needs pruning. Some days touching it would harm it. Your grandmother had learned to feel the difference. She knew when to act and when to simply allow. But how do I learn that? Miho asked. I do not have her experience. Start by doing less, Okada suggested. Much less. Water only when the soil is actually dry. Prune only when a branch is truly damaged or badly placed. Watch the plants. See what they are telling you. Learn to distinguish between your worry that you should do something and the plant's actual need for help. It was hard advice for Miho to follow. Her instinct was to do more, not less. But the garden was dying under her excessive care, so she had to try something different. She began to hold back. When she wanted to water, she would check the soil first. Often it was still moist from the day before. When she wanted to prune, she would ask herself if the plant truly needed it or if she was just anxious to do something. Often the plant was fine as it was. Most difficult of all, she practiced simply observing. She would sit on her grandmother's old bench and just look at the garden. Not planning what to do. Not worrying about what was wrong. Just noticing. How the light fell. How the plants moved in the breeze. Which ones looked content and which ones looked stressed. Slowly, her relationship with the garden changed. She stopped trying to control everything and started responding to what was actually needed. Some days she worked hard, doing heavy tasks that genuinely helped. Other days she barely touched anything, just watered what was dry and otherwise left things alone. And the garden began to recover. The tomatoes, no longer drowning, started to thrive. The flowers, given space to grow naturally, bloomed abundantly. The vegetables grew stronger without constant interference. It was as if the plants had been waiting for her to stop, forcing them and start trusting them. One evening, as Miho sat on the bench watching the sunset light on healthy plants, Okada came by to check on her progress. He smiled at what he saw. Your grandmother would be proud, he said. Not because the garden is perfect, but because you learned what she knew. That gardening is not about imposing your will on nature. It is about finding the balance between helping and allowing, between action and patience, between effort and trust. Miho nodded, feeling a peace she had not known since taking on the garden. I understand now what you meant about doing different, not less. I am actually working in a more focused way than before. But I am also resting more, trusting more. It feels like I am finally working with the garden instead of against it. Yes, Okada said. This is the gardener's wisdom, and not just for plants. For anything we care for, including ourselves. Too much and we smother. Too little and we neglect. Right effort is finding that middle ground where care and allowance meet. Where we support without controlling. Where we try without straining. Years passed, and Miho's garden became known throughout the valley for its beauty and abundance. When people asked her secret, she would smile and say something her grandmother might have said. The secret is knowing when to work and when to wait. When to help and when to trust. The plants already know how to grow. My job is not to make them grow, but to support their natural unfolding. Right effort means doing what is needed, not doing everything possible. That is how peace grows along with the vegetables. Miho's experience with the garden teaches us the same truth from a different direction. She came to her work with good intentions and tremendous effort. She studied hard. She worked tirelessly. But all that effort was misdirected. She was doing too much of everything, and the excess was harming what she was trying to help. Okada showed her something essential about right effort. It is not measured by how much you do or how hard you work. It is measured by whether your effort matches what is actually needed. Sometimes plants need watering. Sometimes they need to be left alone. Both can be right effort, depending on the situation. When Miho learned to observe before acting, to feel what was needed rather than anxiously doing everything possible, the garden flourished. Not because she started being lazy or careless. She was still attentive and dedicated. But her effort became appropriate to what each moment required. Sometimes active. Sometimes patient, always balanced. This teaching brings such peace because it frees us from the exhausting belief that we must always be doing more. Right effort means we can rest when rest is needed. We can act when action is needed. We can trust the natural unfolding of things instead of thinking we must control every detail. In gardening, in archery, in all of life, the middle way offers this gift. We do not have to choose between trying too hard and giving up. We can find the place where effort is alive but not desperate. Engaged but not strained. Strong but not rigid. This is where skill develops. This is where peace lives. This is what becomes possible when we learn the wisdom of right effort. This is the third basic truth of Zen Buddhism. That balanced effort brings what extreme effort cannot force. That the middle way between too tight and too loose is where mastery lives. That peace comes not from straining or slacking, but from finding that sweet spot where we are fully present and gently allowing at the same time. When we discover this balance, we stop fighting ourselves and life begins to flow with a grace we could not access through force alone. One of the most profound insights of Buddhism is also one of the simplest to state and yet hardest to truly grasp. Nothing exists in isolation. Everything is connected to everything else. We think of ourselves as separate individuals moving through a world of separate objects and separate people. But this sense of separation is not the deepest truth. It is a useful illusion, but still an illusion. The Buddha taught that we are like waves in the ocean. Each wave appears distinct with its own shape and motion. We can point to a wave and say, "There, that one." But is the wave actually separate from the ocean? Where does the ocean end and the wave begin? The wave is made entirely of ocean. It has no existence apart from the water that forms it. And when it subsides, it does not disappear. It returns to being ocean, which it always was. This teaching is called dependent origination or interdependence. It means that nothing exists on its own. Everything arises in relationship to everything else. The food we eat connects us to soil and rain and sun and the labor of farmers. The breath we take connects us to trees and forests and the whole atmosphere of the planet. The thoughts we think are shaped by language we learned from others, ideas we absorbed from culture, experiences we had in relationship. When we truly see this interconnection, compassion arises naturally. How can we harm another when we understand we are not separate from them? How can we be indifferent to suffering when we recognize that the boundary between self and other is not as solid as it appears? The pain of one is, in a real sense, the pain of all. The joy of one enriches the whole web of connection. This insight also brings a kind of peace. When we feel isolated, when we think we are alone in our struggles, life feels heavy and hard. But when we recognize we are part of something larger, held in a vast web of connection, supported by countless seen and unseen relationships, a weight lifts. We are not alone. We have never been alone. We are threads in a vast fabric, and the fabric holds us. The Zen masters teach that this interconnection is not just philosophy. It is direct experience available in each moment. When we eat, we can taste our connection to earth and rain. When we breathe, we can feel our exchange with the world. When we meet another person's eyes, we can sense the deeper reality that there are not two separate beings, but one shared field of awareness expressing itself in two forms. Living with this understanding changes how we move through the world. Our actions take on new weight when we realize they ripple outward in ways we cannot fully track. Our choices matter not just for ourselves, but for the whole web we are part of. And this is not a burden, but a beautiful responsibility. We get to participate in something larger than our small, separate self. We get to contribute to the well-being of the whole. Let your shoulders drop just a little as you listen. Feel the surface beneath you, supporting your weight without effort. You are being held right now. You have always been held. Let us explore a story about someone who discovered this truth through the discipline of making music with others, where every note exists only in relationship to all the other notes around it. In a city known for its musical tradition, there lived a young flute player named Kaito who possessed extraordinary technical skill. From childhood, he had practiced obsessively, mastering difficult pieces that other musicians found impossible. His fingers moved with perfect precision. But Kaito had a problem. He struggled whenever he played in an ensemble. He had recently joined a well-regarded chamber music group that included other flute players, string players, and a drummer. The music they played was complex, requiring all the musicians to blend their sounds into a unified whole. Kaito approached ensemble playing the same way he approached solo performance. He would practice his own part until it was perfect, then show up to rehearsal ready to play it exactly as he had practiced. But something always went wrong. The other musicians would complain that he was too loud, or that his timing was off, or that his interpretation did not match the group's sound. Kaito found this frustrating. He was playing his part correctly. If the others would simply play their parts with equal precision, everything would work. He began to think the problem was that his fellow musicians were not as skilled as he was, that they were holding him back. the group's leader, an elderly string player named Fumio, noticed Kaito's growing frustration. After one particularly difficult rehearsal, Fumio asked Kaito to stay behind for a conversation. "You play beautifully," Fumio said gently. "Your technical skill is remarkable. But you are not yet playing with us. You are playing alongside us. Do you understand the difference?" Kaito frowned. "I play my part correctly. I do not miss notes. I keep time. What more is there?" Fumio picked up his instrument. "Listen to this." He played a simple melodic phrase, beautiful and complete on its own. "Now listen to this." He played the same phrase, but this time he left space, played some notes softer, emphasized different moments. It sounded incomplete, almost wrong on its own. "The second version sounds like you made mistakes," Kaito said. "Exactly," Fumio replied. "But watch what happens when I play that version with others." He called back 2 other musicians who had been packing up to leave. He played his incomplete-sounding phrase while they played their parts. Together, the 3 parts wove into something beautiful. The spaces Fumio had left were filled by the other instruments. The notes he had softened allowed other notes to shine. The emphasis he had changed created a conversation between the parts. "Do you see?" Fumio asked. "When I play alone, I play a complete piece. But when I play with others, I must play an incomplete piece. A piece that needs the others to become whole. This is the essence of ensemble music. Not playing your part perfectly, but playing your part in perfect relationship to all the other parts." Kaito listened, but still did not fully understand. "So, I should play quieter?" "Sometimes yes, sometimes no," Fumio said. "It depends on what is happening around you. This is what you must learn. To listen to the whole while you play your part. To feel where your sound fits in the larger sound. To be willing to change what you do based on what others are doing." Over the following weeks, Fumio worked with Kaito on a new approach to ensemble playing. Instead of practicing his part in isolation until it was perfect, Kaito began attending rehearsals not fully prepared. Instead of knowing exactly what he would do, he came ready to discover what was needed in the moment. At first, this felt terrifying. Kaito was used to control, to knowing exactly what he would play and when. But Fumio encouraged him to try something different. To listen more and plan less. To play softer when others were playing loud, so the listener could hear the full texture. To leave space when the music was dense, so it could breathe. To match his timing not to a metronome, but to the actual breathing and phrasing of his fellow musicians. It was harder than any technical challenge Kaito had ever faced. His fingers knew how to play difficult passages, but his awareness did not yet know how to track 5 or 6 other musicians while also playing his own part. His attention kept collapsing back into just his flute, his notes, his performance. But gradually, something began to shift. There were moments during rehearsal when Kaito would suddenly hear the whole ensemble instead of just himself. In those moments, he could feel where his sound was too loud or too soft, too early or too late, not because someone told him, but because he could hear how it fit or did not fit with the surrounding sounds. One evening, during a particularly beautiful passage, Kaito experienced something remarkable. For several measures, he completely forgot about himself. His awareness expanded to include the whole group. He could hear the string player beside him breathing, could feel the drummer's rhythm in his own body, could sense exactly when to enter and when to hold back. His flute became not a separate voice but one color in a larger painting, one thread in a woven fabric. When the piece ended, Kaito sat in stunned silence. The music they had just made was more beautiful than anything he had achieved in solo performance. But his own contribution had been smaller, simpler, less technically impressive. And yet, it had felt more satisfying than any perfect solo performance ever had. "Now you are beginning to understand?" Fumio said quietly. Music is not about individual excellence, though skill matters. Music is about relationship, about how sounds connect and support and complement each other. You have been trying to be a great individual musician. But what we need is for you to be a great ensemble musician. And that requires a different kind of listening, a different kind of awareness. Over the following months, Kaito's entire approach to music transformed. He still practiced his technical skills, but he spent more time practicing listening. He would sit in rehearsal and challenge himself to track every instrument simultaneously, to hear not just notes, but relationships between notes, to sense not just rhythm, but the breathing and energy of the whole group. The other musicians noticed the change. Kaito was no longer fighting to be heard over everyone else. He was finding his place within the collective sound. Sometimes that meant playing boldly when space opened for it. Sometimes it meant playing so softly he could barely be heard individually, but his quiet line would add essential color to the texture. The music the ensemble made together grew richer and more cohesive. And Kaito discovered something unexpected. Playing in true relationship with others was more fulfilling than solo virtuosity had ever been. There was joy in being part of something larger than himself, in contributing to a beauty that no single person could create alone. Years later, when Kaito became a teacher, he would tell his students something that would have surprised his younger self. You can practice alone to develop your skill, but you cannot learn music alone. Music exists in relationship. It lives in the space between sounds, in the way one note calls forth another, in how silence and sound dance together. To be a musician is not to master your instrument. It is to learn how to participate in something larger than yourself. Kaito's journey shows us what interconnection means in practice. He began believing that excellence was individual, that his job was to play his part perfectly, and if everyone else did the same, the music would work. But this was a misunderstanding of how music actually functions. Music is not separate perfect parts happening simultaneously. It is one unified thing made of many voices. Each part exists in relationship to all the other parts. A note that is perfect in isolation might be wrong in context. A phrase that sounds complete alone might need to be incomplete to allow space for others. When Kaito learned to listen to the whole while playing his part, everything changed. He stopped being a separate individual trying to be heard and became one voice in a collective conversation. His contribution became more subtle, but also more essential. He discovered that being part of something interconnected was more satisfying than being excellent alone. Take a breath now and let it out slowly. Notice how the air you release becomes the air around you, no longer yours, no longer separate. This is how it always is. We are breathing with the world, not just in it. This teaching about interconnection offers profound peace. When we recognize we are not isolated individuals, the burden of having to be self-sufficient lifts. We do not have to do everything alone. We are part of a vast web of mutual support. Every person we meet, every exchange we have, is an opportunity to participate in something larger than our separate self. As you rest here, let yourself feel this truth settling into you like rain soaking into soil. You are not separate. You are connected to everything, held by everything. Part of one vast living system that breathes together, moves together, exists together. Let this knowing soften any sense of isolation or aloneness. You belong to this web. You always have. Feel the weight of your body being supported right now. Something is holding you. The earth beneath you, the structure around you, the air surrounding you. You are being held in this moment by forces you did not create and do not control. This is always true. We are always being held. Let us explore another story that shows this truth from a different angle, through someone whose simple act of kindness revealed how one choice can ripple through an entire community in ways we could never predict. In a town that served as a resting point for travelers on a long mountain road, there lived an innkeeper named Taro who ran a modest establishment. His inn was neither the finest nor the cheapest in town. It was simply clean and comfortable, with fair prices and decent food. Taro had run it this way for 20 years, making enough to support his family, but never seeking to expand or become wealthy. One winter evening, during a particularly harsh snowstorm, a traveler arrived at Taro's door just as he was closing for the night. The man looked exhausted and cold, his thin clothes inadequate for the weather. He asked about a room, but then admitted he had very little money. Not enough for a room and a meal both. Taro's first instinct was to send the man to a cheaper inn down the street. It was not his responsibility to provide charity, and the winter had been hard on his business. But something in the traveler's face, a quiet dignity in the way he admitted his poverty, touched Taro. "Come in," Taro said. "You can stay tonight. We will work something out about payment." The traveler's name was Hiro, and he was a courier who had fallen on hard times. He gratefully accepted Taro's offer and explained that he was traveling to the next town to start work with a new merchant. Once he reached his destination and began earning again, he would find a way to repay Taro's kindness. Taro gave Hiro a room and a hot meal. He did not expect repayment. It was just one small act of generosity on a cold night. He thought nothing more of it. But 3 months later, something unexpected happened. A well-dressed merchant arrived at Taro's inn and asked specifically for him. The merchant explained that his courier, Hiro, had told him about Taro's kindness. The merchant wanted to thank Taro personally and to offer him regular business. From now on, whenever the merchant's employees traveled this route, they would stay at Taro's inn. This regular business was substantial. The merchant's company was large and prosperous, with many people traveling frequently. Within weeks, Taro's inn went from being half empty most nights to consistently full. He had to hire additional help to manage the increased work. One of the people Taro hired was a young woman named Yuki, who had been struggling to find work after her father's death. The job at the inn allowed her to support her younger siblings and keep the family together. Yuki was hard-working and skilled, and she quickly became essential to the inn's operation. A year later, a fire broke out in a neighboring building in the middle of the night. Yuki, who lived in a room at the inn, was the first to notice smoke. She woke Taro and his family, and together they were able to alert the surrounding buildings before the fire spread. Several families were saved because Yuki raised the alarm in time. One of those families included a young boy named Kenji who loved learning but had no opportunity for education. The boy's father, grateful to Yuki for saving his family, began bringing Kenji to the inn in the evenings where Yuki would teach him reading and basic mathematics during her breaks. She had learned these skills from her own father and enjoyed passing them on. Kenji proved to be exceptionally bright. Years later, a traveling scholar stayed at Taro's inn and happened to meet the boy. Impressed by Kenji's knowledge and curiosity, the scholar arranged for him to study at a temple school in a distant city. Kenji eventually became a respected teacher, educating hundreds of children over his lifetime. One day, many years after that snowy night, an elderly courier named Hiro returned to town and stopped at Taro's inn. Taro recognized him immediately, though both men had aged considerably. "I never properly thanked you," Hiro said. "That night you let me stay despite my inability to pay. You changed the course of my life. I was at my lowest point, and your kindness showed me that the world still had goodness in it. It gave me hope to keep going." Taro shook his head. "I did very little. Just offered a room on a cold night." "Just a room," Hiro repeated. "But do you know what came from that? My employer's business sustained your inn. That allowed you to hire Yuki. Yuki saved the family from the fire. She taught young Kenji, who became a teacher. I heard he has educated over 300 children now. And who knows what those children will do with what they learned." Hiro smiled. "You gave me shelter for one night. But that one choice rippled outward in ways you never imagined. How many lives were touched because you were kind to a stranger? We cannot know. The connection spread in all directions, forward and backward in time." Taro felt overwhelmed by this perspective. "I just did what felt right in the moment. I never thought about consequences." "That is the beautiful thing about interconnection," Hiro said. "We do not need to trace every connection to trust they exist. Every kind act plants seeds we cannot see. Every choice ripples outward. We are all connected in a vast web, and what we do to any single strand affects the whole web." That evening, Taro sat in his inn's common room, watching guests come and go. Families eating together. Travelers sharing stories. His employees serving meals and tending to needs. All of this was here, in some way, because he had opened his door on a snowy night years ago. But it was also here because of countless other choices and connections he could never fully trace. The merchant who sent business his way had made a choice. Yuki's father had taught her skills before he died. The scholar had chosen to stop at this particular inn. Kenji had chosen to apply himself to learning. Each person was a thread in the fabric, and the pattern that emerged was something no single thread had planned or controlled. Taro realized that he was not an isolated innkeeper making isolated choices. He was part of a vast living system where everything affected everything else. His kindness had rippled outward, but kindness shown to him by others had also shaped his life in ways he rarely acknowledged. The farmer who grew his food, the builders who constructed his inn, the travelers who chose to stay, all of them part of the same web. This understanding changed how Taro moved through his days. He paid more attention to small interactions, knowing that what seemed trivial might be the beginning of a ripple he would never see the end of. He felt more connected to everyone he met, recognizing that their lives and his were woven together in ways beyond surface appearances. When people asked him about his success, Taro would tell them it was not his success alone. It belonged to everyone who had contributed to it, knowingly or unknowingly. And more than that, it was just part of a larger pattern of connection that included everything and everyone. "We think we are separate," he would say. "But we are like fish in the ocean, imagining we are independent from the water. Everything we do touches everything else. The question is not whether we are connected. We are. The question is whether we live with awareness of that connection or in ignorance of it." Taro's story reveals interconnection from yet another perspective. He made one simple choice to help a stranger on a cold night. That choice seemed small at the time, but it set in motion a chain of events that affected dozens of lives in ways he could never have predicted. This is how interconnection actually works. Not as abstract philosophy, but as living reality. One act of kindness leading to business opportunity, leading to employment, leading to a fire being noticed, leading to education, leading to hundreds of children learning. Each connection making the next possible. Each choice rippling outward in ways that exceed our ability to track. What strikes us in this story is that Taro did not act kindly because he knew it would lead to good results. He acted from immediate compassion. The web of consequences was beyond his knowledge or control. This teaches us something important. We do not need to understand all the connections to trust they exist. We do not need to trace every ripple to know our actions matter. Let your breathing settle into its natural rhythm now. Each breath you take is part of an exchange with the world. Trees and plants breathe out what you breathe in. You breathe out what they breathe in. This is interconnection in its most basic form. Not separate beings, but one breathing system expressing itself through many forms. Living with awareness of interconnection brings a gentle responsibility. Our choices matter not just for ourselves, but for the whole web we are part of. But this is not a burden. It is a beautiful invitation to participate in something larger than our small, separate concerns. To know that our kindness radiates outward, that our care touches more than we can see, that we are contributing to a vast collective well-being simply by being awake to our connection with all things. As you rest here, let this understanding settle deeper. Feel how you are not alone in your struggle or your joy. How your life is held in a vast web of relationship, supported by countless seen and unseen connections. This is not poetry. This is the actual nature of reality. Nothing exists separately. Everything arises in relationship. You are part of the whole, and the whole moves through you. Let your jaw soften if it has been tense. Let your belly release if you have been holding it tight. You do not have to hold yourself together so rigidly. You are being held by something larger, by the web of connection that includes everything. You can relax into this knowing. You can trust that you belong here, that you are part of this vast living system, that your presence matters to the whole. This teaching about interconnection changes how we see the world. Not as a collection of separate things bumping into each other, but as one living system expressing itself through infinite forms. When we truly grasp this, compassion becomes natural. How can we harm what we are not separate from? How can we be indifferent when we recognize that every being is part of the same web that holds us? The peace that comes from this understanding is subtle but profound. We stop feeling so isolated, so alone in our struggles. We recognize we are held, supported, connected to everything. And in that recognition, life becomes less of a battle to survive on our own and more of a dance where we play our part in the larger movement, where we contribute our voice to the collective song, where we trust that we are exactly where we need to be, doing exactly what is ours to do, part of something far more beautiful and complex than we could grasp with our thinking minds alone. Rest in this knowing. You are not separate. You never were. You are a wave in the ocean, and the ocean is you. This truth has always been true. We are simply remembering it together. There is a teaching in Buddhism that uses a word that can sound frightening at first: emptiness. When we hear this word, we might think of loss, of nothingness, of a void that swallows meaning. But this is not what the Buddha meant when he spoke of emptiness. He was pointing to something liberating, something that makes life possible rather than taking it away. Emptiness in Buddhism means something specific. It means that things do not have fixed, permanent, separate existence. Everything is open, flowing, changing, interdependent. A cup is not just a solid object that exists on its own. It is clay that came from earth, shaped by hands, given form by space, holding water temporarily, eventually breaking and returning to earth. At what point is it truly, permanently, separately a cup? The cup is empty of independent existence. It exists only in relationship to everything else. But here is the beautiful thing. This emptiness is not a problem. It is what makes everything possible. A cup is useful precisely because of its empty space. If a cup was solid all the way through, it could not hold water. The emptiness is what gives it function. The absence is what creates possibility. This teaching extends to everything. A room is useful because of empty space inside walls. A door works because of the empty space it opens and closes. Music exists because of silence between notes. Language means something because of space between words. Everywhere we look, we find that emptiness and form are not opposites. They are partners. They need each other. When we understand this, something relaxes inside us. We stop trying to be so solid, so fixed, so permanently defined. We recognize that our own openness, our own capacity to change and grow and become something new, this is not a flaw. It is our greatest strength. We are not diminished by our emptiness. We are made possible by it. The Zen masters teach that we suffer when we try to make things solid that are naturally fluid. When we cling to identities, relationships, circumstances, trying to freeze them in place. But everything is already flowing, already changing, already empty of permanent separate existence. When we stop fighting this and start working with it, we discover a freedom we did not know was available. This does not mean nothing matters or that life is meaningless. It means the opposite. Because things are empty of fixed existence, they can be shaped. Because we are not solidly one thing forever, we can grow and change. Because nothing is permanent, each moment is precious. Emptiness is not the enemy of meaning. It is what makes meaning possible. Living with this understanding brings a lightness. We can hold our opinions more gently, knowing they are not absolute truth. We can play our roles in life without being trapped by them. We can engage fully with what is here while knowing it will change. This is the freedom that comes from understanding emptiness. Not freedom from life, but freedom within life. Notice the space around you right now, the air between you and the walls, the silence underneath any sounds. This space is not nothing. It is what allows everything to be. Rest in this spaciousness for a moment. Let us explore a story about someone whose craft taught him this truth through the most ordinary of objects, and how understanding emptiness transformed not just his work, but his entire way of seeing. In a village known for its craftsmen, there lived a carpenter named Masaru who made bowls and cups and containers of all kinds. He had learned his trade from his father and grandfather before him. He was skilled with wood, able to shape it into beautiful forms. His bowls were smooth and well balanced. His work sold well at the market. But Masaru was troubled by a question that would not leave him alone. He made bowls, yes. But what exactly was a bowl? When he looked at the finished object, what he saw was wood. Shaped wood, carefully formed wood, but still just wood. The wood was what he worked with, what he could touch and see and smell. The wood was real. But customers did not buy his bowls because they wanted shaped wood. They bought them to hold rice, to contain soup, to carry water. And all of these functions depended on something Masaru never actually created. The empty space inside the bowl. The hollow. The absence. This bothered him in a way he could not quite explain. He spent his days shaping wood, creating forms. But the usefulness of those forms came from something he never touched. The emptiness inside. It was there, clearly, or the bowl would not work. But he did not make it. It was simply what was left when he removed wood. One autumn, a Zen monk came through the village and stayed at the local temple. Masaru had heard this monk was wise, someone who could answer difficult questions about the nature of things. On impulse, Masaru brought one of his finest bowls to the temple and asked to speak with the monk. The monk, whose name was Sozan, accepted the bowl and examined it carefully. He ran his fingers over the smooth interior and exterior. He held it up to the light. He turned it over in his hands. "This is excellent work," Sozan said. "You are a skilled craftsman." "Thank you," Masaru replied. "But I have a question that troubles me. When you look at this bowl, what do you see?" Sozan smiled. "I see a bowl." "Yes, but what is the bowl?" Masaru pressed. "I shaped the wood. I created the form. But the bowl's usefulness comes from something I never made. The empty space inside. I spend my days working with wood, but it is the emptiness that makes my work valuable. This confuses me. What is real, the wood or the emptiness?" Sozan set the bowl down between them. "Pick it up," he said. Masaru picked up the bowl. "Now, answer me this," Sozan said. "When you pick up the bowl, are you picking up the wood or the emptiness?" Masaru thought about this. "Well, I am holding the wood. My hands touch the wood. And yet, if I asked you to bring me a bowl so I could eat soup, and you brought me a solid block of wood, would that be a bowl?" "No, of course not." So the bowl requires both the wood and the emptiness. Neither is the bowl alone. They create each other. The wood gives shape to the emptiness. The emptiness gives function to the wood. You ask which is real, but this is the wrong question. They are both real, and they are not separate. Sozan picked up the bowl, and held it to the light. Look here, where the wood is thin and the light shines through. The wood and the emptiness meet at this edge. Can you point to where one ends and the other begins? They are always together, always creating each other. Form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. Masaru felt something shift in his understanding, but he was not quite there yet. But I work with the wood. I shape it. The emptiness just appears as a result. Does it? Sozin asked. Or do you shape the wood around the emptiness you want to create? When you begin a bowl, what are you imagining? The wood or the hollow? Masaru realized the truth of this. When he started a bowl, he was not thinking about creating wood. He was thinking about creating a space that could hold things. The wood was just his method of defining that space. He was, in fact, sculpting emptiness. You see, Sozin continued, we think solid things are real and empty space is nothing. But your bowls teach a different lesson. The empty space is not nothing. It is what makes the bowl a bowl. Without emptiness, you just have a useless piece of wood. The emptiness is as essential as the form. They need each other. Sozin stood and walked to the temple door. Come, let me show you something. He led Masaru outside and pointed to the temple building. Why is this structure useful? Because it provides shelter, Masaru said. Yes. And how does it provide shelter? Masaru thought about it. Because of the walls and roof. Look more carefully, Sozin encouraged. The walls and roof are just wood and tile. What makes this building useful as shelter is not the walls themselves, but the empty space they create inside. We call it a room. We say we are inside the building. But really, we are inside the emptiness that the building defines. The building exists to create and protect emptiness. They walked through the temple grounds, and Sozin pointed out example after example. The gate worked because of the empty space you walked through. The water bucket was useful because of emptiness that held water. The path was defined by empty space between plantings. Everywhere, emptiness and form were partners, creating usefulness together. By the time Masaru returned home, he saw his work completely differently. He was not just a woodworker. He was a shaper of emptiness. Every bowl, every cup, every container was his way of creating and defining useful empty space. The wood was important, yes. But it was important as the edge, the boundary, the definition of emptiness. This understanding changed his craft in subtle ways. He began to pay more attention to the space inside his bowls, to the quality of the hollow, to how the emptiness felt when you looked into it or reached into it. His bowls became even more beautiful because he was consciously shaping both the form and the emptiness, recognizing both as equally real and important. But the change went deeper than his work. Masaru began to see emptiness everywhere in life. In the pause between his hammer strikes, in the silence after a conversation, in the rest between days of work, in the space between thoughts. All of this emptiness was not absence. It was presence of a different kind. It was what made movement possible, what made sound meaningful, what made rest restful. He realized that he himself was like a bowl in a way. His body was form, yes, but his consciousness was like the empty space inside a bowl. Open, receptive, able to hold experiences without being solid. His awareness was not a thing. It was a spaciousness that allowed thoughts and feelings and sensations to arise and pass. This understanding brought tremendous peace. Masaru stopped needing to be so solid, so fixed, so permanently defined. He could be like his bowls, shaped and useful, but fundamentally open. Not diminished by his openness, but made possible by it. Years later, when students came to learn carpentry from him, Masaru would begin their training in an unusual way. Before teaching them how to shape wood, he would have them sit with an empty bowl and meditate on the space inside it. "You want to learn to make bowls," he would say. "But first you must learn to see emptiness. To recognize that space is not nothing. To understand that usefulness comes from openness. Once you see this, once you really see it, then we can talk about wood." Masaru's journey shows us what emptiness means in lived experience. He struggled with a paradox that his thinking mind could not resolve. The bowl was clearly the wood, the solid material he worked with. But the bowl's function came entirely from what was not wood, from the empty space he never actually created. Sozen helped him see that this apparent paradox reveals a deeper truth. Form and emptiness are not separate. They arise together. They define each other. The wood gives shape to the emptiness. The emptiness gives purpose to the wood. Neither is more real than the other. Both are essential. When Masaru understood this, his whole relationship to his craft transformed. He was no longer just working with wood. He was shaping space itself, using wood as his tool for defining useful emptiness. This was not just a philosophical insight. It was practical wisdom that made his work more skillful and more satisfying. Take a breath now and feel the space inside your lungs expanding to receive air, then releasing it back into the world. Your body knows about emptiness and form, knows how they dance together with each breath. The emptiness inside allows the fullness to enter. The releasing creates space for receiving. But the teaching goes deeper than craft. When we recognize that emptiness is not nothing, that openness is not lack, everything shifts. We stop trying to fill every moment, every silence, every pause. We start to recognize that the spaces in our lives are not gaps to be filled, but essential parts of the rhythm. The rest between activities. The silence between words. The pause between thoughts. All of this emptiness is not absence, but presence of a different kind. The peace that comes from this understanding is subtle but profound. We can relax our grip on needing to be something solid and fixed. We can allow ourselves to be more open, more fluid, more receptive. Like the bowl that receives water precisely because it is empty, we can receive life more fully when we are not packed solid with fixed ideas about who we must be. Let your body settle a little deeper into rest. Feel how you are not solid all the way through. There is spaciousness in you. Room for breath to move, for thoughts to arise, for experiences to happen. This inner openness is not a flaw. It is what makes your life possible. Rest in this knowing for now. Notice any sounds around you, and notice especially the silence between sounds. The silence is not the absence of sound. It is what allows you to distinguish one sound from another. It is what gives rhythm and meaning to what you hear. Emptiness and form, dancing together. Let us explore another story that shows this truth from a different angle, through someone whose art depended on understanding that emptiness is not nothing, but rather the ground of all possibility. In a town famous for its textiles, there lived a cloth dyer named Naoko who created beautiful fabrics in rich, vibrant colors. She had learned the craft from her mother, mastering the complex techniques of natural dyes made from plants, minerals, and insects. Her colored cloths were sought after throughout the region for their depth and brilliance. But Naoko had become fixated on color itself. She spent her days mixing dyes, testing new combinations, trying to achieve ever more striking hues. She would look at her work and see only the colors she had added. Red from madder root, blue from indigo, yellow from turmeric. Each color was an achievement, a skill she had developed, a beauty she had created. One spring, a customer came to her workshop with an unusual request. She wanted cloth that was not dyed at all. Natural, undyed fabric. Naoko was puzzled. Why would anyone want plain cloth when they could have beautiful colors? The color is what makes fabric special, Naoko said. Undyed cloth is just nothing. It has no character. The customer smiled. Perhaps. But it also has all character. It is ready to become anything. Naoko dismissed this as poetic nonsense. But the conversation stayed with her. That evening, instead of working with her dyes, she sat with a piece of undyed fabric in her hands. It was creamy, white, simple, plain. She had always seen such fabric as a canvas waiting for her art, waiting to be made beautiful through color. But now she tried to see it as the customer had described it, as something complete in itself. At first, she could not. The cloth seemed dull, empty, lacking. But as she sat with it longer, something began to shift in her perception. The undyed fabric was not trying to be anything. It was not striving to catch the eye or make an impression. It simply was what it was. And in that simplicity, there was a kind of peace. More than that, Naoko began to realize that the undyed cloth held a special quality. Potential. Because it was not red or blue or yellow, it could become any of these. Because it had not been fixed into one identity, it remained open to all possibilities. The absence of color was not emptiness in the sense of lacking. It was emptiness in the sense of openness. A few days later, Naoko tried an experiment. She took 2 pieces of cloth. One she dyed a deep, rich red, using all her skill to create the most beautiful red she could achieve. The other she left undyed. She set them side by side in her workshop. Over the following weeks, she observed these 2 pieces with new attention. The red cloth was indeed beautiful, but it was also finished, complete. It could not become anything else without first having its redness removed. It was fixed in its identity. The undyed cloth remained open. At any moment, it could receive any color. It could become part of any project. It could be cut and shaped and used in countless ways without first needing to be changed. Its plainness was actually a form of flexibility. Its lack of specific color was actually a kind of freedom. Naoko began to see parallels to her own life. She had spent years developing her identity as a master dyer. This identity was real, like the color in her dyed cloths. She was good at what she did. But she had also become fixed in that identity. When opportunities arose that were not about dyeing, she dismissed them. When people suggested she try new approaches, she resisted. She was like her red cloth, beautiful but complete, fixed but limited. She thought about the undyed cloth's openness. What would it mean to be more like that in her own life? To not be so completely defined by what she had already become? To remain open to new possibilities even while maintaining her skills? Naoko started experimenting in her workshop. Instead of only creating boldly colored fabrics, she began working with subtle variations, leaving some areas undyed, creating pieces where the natural color of the fabric played as important a role as the dyes she added. She discovered that the contrast between dyed and undyed areas created a tension that was more interesting than solid color alone. Some of her regular customers were puzzled by this new direction. They came to her for brilliant colors, not for fabric with empty spaces. But other customers, particularly those who practiced tea ceremony and valued simplicity, were drawn to this new work. They saw in it a sophistication that pure color lacked. More importantly, Naoko's own relationship to her craft deepened. She was no longer just adding beauty to plain fabric. She was working with the dialogue between color and its absence, between form and emptiness, between what was there and what was not there. She began to see that both were essential, that the undyed areas made the dyed areas more powerful. That emptiness gave meaning to fullness. One afternoon, a young apprentice came to study with Naoko. The girl was eager and asked to learn how to create the most vibrant colors possible. Naoko agreed to teach her. But first, she gave the girl an assignment that seemed strange. "Take this undyed cloth," Naoko said. "For 1 month, I want you to work with it every day. But you are not to dye it. Just study it. Notice its qualities. Sit with its plainness. See what it teaches you." The apprentice was disappointed. She wanted to make beautiful colors, not stare at blank cloth. But she respected her teacher and did as asked. At the end of the month, the girl returned. "I do not understand this assignment," she admitted. "The cloth is still plain. I have learned nothing." "What did you observe?" Naoko asked. "It is white. It is plain. It waits, I suppose." "Good. That waiting, that openness, that is emptiness. Now tell me, if I asked you to dye this cloth red right now, could you?" "Yes, easily." "What if I asked you to dye it blue?" "Yes, that too." "And if I asked you to cut it into the shape of a flower or use it as a base for embroidery or any of 1,000 other things?" "All possible." "Now look at this cloth," Naoko said, showing the girl a piece of fabric she had dyed a deep purple. "If I ask you to make this cloth red, can you?" "Not without first removing the purple." "And if I wanted to use it for a purpose that needed white cloth?" "It would not work." "You see? The purple cloth is beautiful, yes, but it is also limited, fixed. The undyed cloth appears empty, appears to be nothing special, but that emptiness is actually fullness of potential. Because it is not fixed as one thing, it can become anything. This is the teaching of emptiness. Not that undyed cloth is better than dyed cloth, but that openness and fixedness, emptiness and form, both have their place. Both are valuable. We need them both." The apprentice began to understand. Over her years of training, she learned not just to create color, but to appreciate its absence. To value the spaces she left, undyed as much as the areas she colored. To see that the most sophisticated work came from understanding the dance between emptiness and form. Years later, Naoko's workshop became known for a distinctive style that other dyers tried to imitate. Fabrics where undyed and dyed areas created patterns of great subtlety and power, where the plainness and the color enhanced each other, where emptiness and fullness were recognized as partners rather than opposites. When visitors asked about her technique, Naoko would say something that sounded simple but held depths. "I do not just add color to cloth. I work with the relationship between color and its absence. The dyed areas matter, but so do the undyed areas." Learning to value emptiness as much as form, this is what took me from being a good dyer to understanding what dyeing really is. Naoko's story reveals another dimension of emptiness. She began seeing undyed cloth as nothing, as merely waiting to be made beautiful through her skill. But when she learned to look at it with fresh eyes, she saw that its plainness was not lack, but potential. Its openness was not weakness, but strength. The undyed fabric could become anything precisely because it was not already something fixed. Like the empty space inside Masaru's bowls, the absence of color in Naoko's cloth was not nothing. It was the ground of all possibility. It was what allowed change, growth, transformation. It was freedom in the form of openness. When Naoko began working with the relationship between dyed and undyed areas, her art deepened. She stopped seeing her work as simply adding color to emptiness. She recognized that emptiness and form need each other, that the undyed areas give power to the colored areas, that the spaces make the solid forms meaningful. Let your eyes close for a moment if they have been open, or soften your gaze if they are already closed. Notice the darkness or softness behind your eyelids. This is not nothing. It is the background that allows images to appear when your eyes open. It is the emptiness that makes seeing possible. Rest in this gentle darkness. This teaching about emptiness offers profound freedom. When we understand that openness is not lack, that potential is not the same as absence, we can release our desperate need to be filled, to be fixed, to be completely defined. We can allow ourselves to remain open, to be unfinished, to be receptive to what comes. Like undyed cloth, we have the capacity to receive new experiences, learn new things, become something we have not yet imagined. This is not because we are lacking something, but because we are fundamentally open. Our consciousness is not a solid thing, but a spacious awareness that can hold anything. This openness is our nature, and it is what makes growth and change and wisdom possible. Feel the rise and fall of your breathing. Notice the pause at the top of the inhale and the pause at the bottom of the exhale. These pauses are not interruptions. They are essential parts of the breathing cycle. The emptiness between breaths is what allows the next breath to begin. Form and emptiness, taking turns, making life possible. The peace that comes from understanding emptiness is the peace of not needing to be completely filled, completely finished, completely fixed. We can carry our identities and skills lightly, like Naoko carrying her mastery of dyeing. We can be good at what we do while remaining open to what we might become. We can hold our lives with the same appreciation we might hold undyed cloth, valuing what is here while also valuing the openness that allows new possibilities to arise. This is the wisdom of emptiness. Not that nothing matters, but that openness matters as much as form. Not that we should be empty of everything, but that our capacity for openness is what makes us truly alive. The bowl is useful because of its hollow. The room is shelter because of the space inside walls. We are human because of our capacity to receive, to learn, to grow, to remain open to what we have not yet encountered. Rest in this spacious awareness now. You are not solid all the way through. You are more like the sky than like a rock. Vast, open, able to hold everything without being cluttered by anything. This is your nature. This is what emptiness really means. Not absence, but presence of a different kind. The presence of infinite possibility. The openness that allows life to flow through you moment by moment, always fresh, always new, always exactly what this moment asks for. Let this understanding settle into your bones. You do not need to be so tightly defined, so completely fixed in one identity. You can be skilled and accomplished while also remaining open and receptive. You can be fully yourself while also being spacious enough to change and grow. This is what the Buddha meant by emptiness. This is the freedom that comes from recognizing that openness is not lack, but the very ground of being itself. One of the most hopeful teachings in all of Buddhism is the teaching of Buddha nature. This means that every being already possesses the seed of awakening within them, not as something we must earn or achieve, but as something we already are. Underneath all our confusion, beneath all our mistakes and struggles, there is a fundamental goodness, a basic wisdom, a natural capacity for peace and clarity. The Buddha taught this after his own awakening. He looked at all beings and saw that they all share this same potential for wisdom. Not just special people, not just monks or saints or those who have trained for years. Everyone. The most troubled person and the most peaceful person both carry Buddha nature. The difference is only whether they have recognized it or not. This teaching is radically different from the idea that we are broken and need to be fixed, that we are sinful and need to be saved, that we are lacking and need to become complete. Buddha nature says we are already complete, already whole, already carrying within us everything we need for peace and awakening. We simply need to recognize what has always been true. Think of it like the sun on a cloudy day. The clouds cover the sun and we cannot see its light. But the sun is still there, still shining, still bright. The clouds are temporary. They come and go. But the sun remains. Our confusion, our pain, our struggles are like clouds, temporary coverings over the light that is always present. Buddha nature is the sun that never stops shining, even when we cannot see it. This understanding brings tremendous relief. It means we do not have to become someone different to find peace. We do not have to achieve perfection before we can rest. We can recognize that underneath all our human difficulties, there is something pure and undamaged. Something that has never been broken, even when we feel most broken. The Zen masters teach that recognizing Buddha nature is not about gaining something new. It is about seeing clearly what has always been present, like finding a jewel you had been carrying in your pocket all along. You were never without it. You simply did not know it was there. When we see Buddha nature in ourselves, we naturally begin to see it in others as well. That difficult person who frustrates us also carries this light, even if it is deeply buried. That person who has made terrible mistakes still has this fundamental goodness at their core. This does not excuse harm or mean we ignore consequences. But it means we can hold others with more compassion, recognizing that their Buddha nature is just as real as ours, even when it is hidden by layers of pain and confusion. Living with this understanding changes everything. We treat ourselves with more gentleness when we remember we are not fundamentally flawed. We meet others with more patience when we remember they carry the same light we do. We trust that healing and growth are possible because Buddha nature is always present, always waiting to be recognized, no matter how lost someone might appear to be. Let us explore a story about someone whose work brought him face to face with this teaching in the most unlikely of places, where society says there is no goodness left to find. In a time when prisons were harsh and hopeless places, there lived a guard named Izao, who worked in a fortress that held criminals sentenced to long terms. He had taken this work because he needed employment, not because he cared about prisoners. His job was simple: keep them contained, prevent escape, maintain order. The prisoners were dangerous people who had harmed others. Thieves, violent men, those who had broken society's laws. Izao viewed them as fundamentally different from himself. Bad people who deserved their punishment. For his first year of work, Izao maintained this view easily. He kept distance from the prisoners, spoke to them only when necessary, saw them as a category rather than as individuals. Criminal, prisoner, other. These labels kept everything simple. But one prisoner began to complicate this simple view. An old man named Saburo, who had been imprisoned for 20 years already and would likely die behind these walls. Saburo was quiet and caused no trouble. He would sit in the prison yard during the allowed time outside, simply watching the sky or the birds that landed nearby. Other prisoners avoided him. Guards ignored him. He seemed to exist in his own peaceful world, despite being in this terrible place. Izao found himself watching this old man with growing curiosity. How could someone be peaceful in such circumstances? After 20 years in prison, most inmates were either broken or bitter. But Saburo seemed neither. He seemed somehow content. One afternoon, Izao's curiosity overcame his professional distance. He approached Saburo in the yard and asked bluntly, "How are you not miserable?" Saburo looked up at him with clear eyes. "Should I be miserable?" "You are in prison," Izao said. "You will likely never leave here. You have lost your freedom, your life. How could you not be miserable?" Saburo smiled gently. "I lost my freedom on the outside. That is why I ended up here. Being in prison simply made visible what was already true." Izao did not understand. "You were free on the outside. You could go where you wanted. Could I?" Saburo asked. "I was a slave to my anger, to my pride, to my need to prove I was stronger than others. Those things imprison me far more effectively than these walls do. At least here, I can see the bars clearly. Out there, I could not see the prison I carried inside myself." Over the following months, Izao found himself talking with Saburo more often. Brief conversations during the old man's time in the yard. The prisoner spoke about things Izao had never considered. About how suffering comes from inside more than from circumstances. About how peace is possible even in difficulty. about how every person carries something pure within them, even if it is buried under years of pain and poor choices. "You think I am different from you," Saburo said one day. "You see yourself as good and me as bad. You are the guard, and I am the criminal. But these are just roles we are playing. Underneath, we are the same. We both carry Buddha nature. We both have the capacity for wisdom and compassion. I just forgot mine for many years." Isao found this idea troubling. "You hurt people. I have read about your crime. You were violent." "Yes," Saburo said simply. "I hurt people. I was drowning in anger and confusion, and I made terrible choices. But those choices were not my nature. They were clouds covering my nature. Being here, with nothing else to do but sit with myself, I have finally begun to see past the clouds, to remember what was underneath all along." "And what is underneath?" Isao asked, not sure he believed any of this. "The same thing that is underneath in you, in everyone. A basic goodness, a capacity for clarity. Buddha nature, the monks call it. It was there even when I was hurting people. I just could not see it. It was buried so deep under my anger and pain that I did not know it existed." Isao wanted to dismiss this as the rationalization of a criminal trying to feel better about himself. But he could not dismiss the actual peace he saw in Saburo's eyes. Whatever this old man had found, it was real. It had changed him genuinely. This conversation planted a seed in Isao that grew over time. He began to look at the prisoners differently. Not as simply bad people, but as people who had forgotten their own Buddha nature. People whose goodness had been buried under trauma, anger, addiction, desperation. They had done harmful things, yes. But were they fundamentally harmful beings? Or were they beings who had lost connection with their own fundamental goodness? He started to notice things he had overlooked before. The prisoner who was violent with other inmates, but was gentle with the mice that lived in the walls. The thief who shared his meager food with weaker prisoners. The man convicted of terrible crimes who wept quietly when he heard a bird singing. Small moments that suggested something decent existed even in people society had labeled as completely bad. This new way of seeing changed how Isao did his work. He still maintained order and kept prisoners contained. That was his job. But he stopped treating them as less than human. He learned their names. He spoke to them with basic respect. When he had to discipline someone, he did so firmly but without cruelty. He began to see his role not just as controlling dangerous people, but as maintaining dignity in an undignified place. The other guards noticed the change and mocked him for going soft. But Isao found his work became more sustainable. When he had seen prisoners as purely bad, he had needed to maintain constant vigilance and hardness. It was exhausting. But when he recognized their Buddha nature beneath their troubles, he could remain alert without becoming cruel. He could be firm without losing his own humanity. Years later, old Saburo died peacefully in his sleep. Isao was the guard who found him the next morning. The old man's face was calm, a slight smile on his lips. Isao felt grief at the loss, which surprised him. He had become friends with a prisoner, something he never thought would happen. At Saburo's simple funeral, attended only by a few guards and inmates who had known him, Isao spoke briefly. "This man taught me something I did not expect to learn in a prison. He taught me that goodness is not something you earn. It is something you are, even when you forget it, even when you lose sight of it for years, even when others cannot see it anymore. It is always there, waiting to be remembered. Saburo remembered his goodness after 20 years in prison. If he could find his Buddha nature in this place, then maybe we all can find ours, wherever we are. From that day forward, Isao approached every prisoner with the question, where is their Buddha nature hiding? Sometimes it was buried very deep. Sometimes he never caught a glimpse of it. But knowing it was there, even when invisible, changed how he showed up for his work. He became known among prisoners as a fair guard, strict but not cruel, firm but respectful. He created order not through fear, but through maintaining dignity. When younger guards asked him how he managed to work in such a difficult place without becoming hardened or bitter, Isao would tell them about Saburo, about learning to see Buddha nature even in people who have forgotten it themselves. When you see only criminality, he would say, you have to protect yourself constantly from bad people. But when you see Buddha nature temporarily hidden, you can do your work without losing yourself. You can maintain boundaries without building walls inside your own heart. Isao's transformation shows us what it means to recognize Buddha nature in lived experience. He began with the common view that divides people into good and bad, guards and criminals, decent people and dangerous people. This division seemed obvious and necessary for his work, but Saburo challenged that simple division, not by denying his own crimes or claiming to be innocent, but by pointing to something deeper than behavior, something that exists underneath actions and circumstances, the fundamental capacity for awakening that every being carries. When Isao began to see Buddha nature in the prisoners, his work changed completely. Not because he became careless or permissive. He still maintained order and safety. But he stopped needing to view prisoners as fundamentally other, as completely different from himself. He could see their crimes as actions taken from confusion and pain, not as expressions of their essential nature. This understanding brought him peace in a difficult job. When you must be around suffering and difficulty all day, recognizing Buddha nature in everyone allows you to remain open rather than closing your heart for protection. You can maintain appropriate boundaries while still seeing the humanity in those around you. Take a breath and let it out slowly. This same breath moves through every living being. The same air that fills your lungs has filled countless others. We are all breathing the same life force, all sharing this basic aliveness that connects us beneath our surface differences. Let us explore another story that shows this truth from a different perspective, through someone whose simple daily work became his path to recognizing Buddha nature in the most ordinary of places. In the countryside, there lived a shepherd named Daisuke, who spent his days and nights watching over a flock of sheep in the mountain meadows. It was simple work, some would say lowly work. No one considered shepherding to be a spiritual practice. It was just a job requiring patience and attention, but nothing particularly special. Daisuke had not chosen this work because he loved it. He had inherited the flock from his uncle and needed to make a living. Most days felt long and empty. He would walk with the sheep to good grazing areas, watch to make sure none wandered too far, protect them from occasional predators. Then he would lead them back to safety for the night. Day after day, season after season. The same simple tasks repeated endlessly. Sometimes traveling monks would pass through the high meadows. Daisuke would watch them with a mixture of envy and regret. They were doing something important with their lives, practicing meditation, studying sacred texts, seeking enlightenment, while he was just a shepherd, watching animals eat grass, keeping them from harm. Nothing spiritual, nothing meaningful, just ordinary survival. One summer, an old monk stopped to rest near where Daisuke was watching his flock. The monk sat on a large stone, completely still, eyes closed. Daisuke tried not to disturb him. This monk was clearly doing something important. Meditating, cultivating wisdom. All the things Daisuke imagined he could do if only he had time, if only his life was different, if only he was not stuck being a shepherd. After a long while, the monk opened his eyes and smiled at Daisuke. "You guard your flock with great attention," he said. "I have been watching you even while sitting. You never let your awareness wander far from the sheep." "It is my job," Daisuke said simply. "Tell me about your work," the monk said. "What do you do all day?" Daisuke shrugged. "Nothing special. I lead them to grass. I watch them eat. I guide them away from danger. I make sure they return safely at night. The same things every day. And when you watch them, what is your mind doing?" "Watching," Daisuke said, confused by the question. "I pay attention to where each sheep is, whether any are straying, if any seem sick or troubled. I notice the weather changing. I listen for predators. I stay alert to what is happening." The monk nodded slowly. "You are describing meditation?" Daisuke laughed. "No, I am describing sheep herding. I am not meditating. I am just doing my job." "What do you think meditation is?" The monk asked gently. "Sitting still with closed eyes, quieting the mind, practicing special techniques. What monks do." "That is one form of meditation," the monk agreed. "But meditation is really about paying attention, being present, maintaining awareness of what is actually happening in each moment. You do this all day, every day. You practice presence constantly. Your work requires it." Daisuke frowned. "But I am not thinking about Buddha or enlightenment. I am thinking about sheep. The object of attention is less important than the quality of attention itself," the monk said. "When you watch your flock with complete presence, not lost in daydreams or worries, but actually here with what is happening, that is meditation. When you notice subtle changes in an animal's behavior because you are truly paying attention, that is mindfulness. Your work is making you practice what monks sit in temples trying to learn." The monk stood and prepared to continue his journey. But before leaving, he said something that would stay with Daisuke for the rest of his life. "You think spiritual practice happens only in temples, only during special activities. But Buddha nature is present everywhere, in everything. In caring for animals as much as in sitting meditation. In protecting life as much as in studying texts. You are already practicing. You just have not recognized it." After the monk left, Daisuke sat with this strange idea. Could his ordinary work really be spiritual practice? Could caring for sheep be as valuable as temple meditation? It seemed impossible, but he decided to test it, to pay attention to his work in a new way. not as something separate from spiritual life, but as spiritual life itself. The next morning, as he led the flock to pasture, he noticed everything differently. The way the early light touched the hillside, the particular sound each sheep made, the feeling of the ground under his feet, the coolness of the air, the vast sky overhead. He had seen all of this 1,000 times before, but now he saw it with new attention, with presence, with awareness that this moment, this simple morning with sheep, was his actual life. Not something to get through while waiting for real life to begin somewhere else. As days passed, Daisuke's relationship to his work transformed completely. He was still doing the same tasks, leading the flock, watching them graze, keeping them safe. But now he did these things with the awareness that this was his practice. This was his opportunity to cultivate presence and compassion, to care for beings who depended on him, to protect life, to be fully here for what needed his attention. He began to see Buddha nature in the sheep themselves. They were not just animals, not just resources. They were living beings with their own awareness, their own experience of life. When a lamb was born, he witnessed the miracle of new life. When an old sheep died peacefully, he recognized the natural cycle of existence. When the flock moved together in their mysterious unified way, he saw the interdependence of all beings. Most importantly, he recognized Buddha nature in himself, not as something he would gain by becoming a monk or studying sacred texts, but as something present right now in his careful attention to his work, in his compassion for the animals in his care, in the peace he felt when he was fully present for whatever this moment required. Years passed, and Daisuke became known in the region not just as a skilled shepherd, but as someone who carried unusual peace and wisdom. People would sometimes seek him out to ask about spiritual matters. They expected him to tell them to leave their ordinary lives and seek something special. But his advice was always the same. Find the Buddha nature in what you are already doing. If you cook, cook with complete presence. If you build, build with full attention. If you care for children, care for them with wholehearted awareness. Buddha nature is not hiding in temples or mountains or sacred texts, though it is there too. It is right here in your ordinary life, waiting for you to recognize it. When young people would tell him they wanted to find enlightenment, he would smile and say, "Enlightenment is not somewhere else. It is here. Not in some future after years of special practice. Here, in this moment, in whatever you are actually doing. I found mine in watching sheep eat grass. Where else would I find it? That was my life. That was where Buddha nature was waiting to be recognized." Daisuke's story reveals another dimension of Buddha nature. He spent years believing that spiritual awakening was something special, something separate from his ordinary work. He thought he would need to become someone different, do something important, go somewhere sacred to find enlightenment. But the old monk helped him see that Buddha nature was already present in his daily life, in the attention he brought to his work, in the care he showed to the animals, in the presence he maintained hour after hour, day after day. His ordinary work was already spiritual practice. He just had not recognized it. This teaching offers tremendous relief to those of us who cannot leave our regular lives to meditate in temples. Buddha nature is not only for monks or special people. It is present in every moment, every activity, every life. A mother caring for children is practicing Buddha nature. A builder constructing a home with care is expressing Buddha nature. Anyone doing anything with full presence and compassionate attention is touching their fundamental wisdom. The peace that comes from this understanding is profound. We can stop waiting for our real spiritual life to begin someday when circumstances are different. We can recognize that our life right now, exactly as it is where Buddha nature lives, where wisdom waits to be recognized, where awakening is already present, simply asking us to see it. This is what the Buddha meant when he taught that all beings possess Buddha nature. Not that we will gain it later through special effort, but that we already have it now, in this moment, in this very ordinary life we are living. The question is not how to get Buddha nature. The question is only how to recognize what has always been true. Rest in this knowing. You are not fundamentally broken or lacking. You carry within you the same light that the Buddha discovered in himself, the same wisdom, the same capacity for peace and clarity. It has been there your entire life. It is there right now, present in your awareness of these words, present in your breathing, present in your being alive in this moment. This is Buddha nature. Not something far away or hard to find, but something as close as your own awareness. Something you have never been without, even when you could not see it. Simply here, simply true, simply waiting to be recognized as what you have always been. We have walked together through ancient wisdom tonight, through teachings about flowing with life instead of fighting it, about seeing with fresh eyes, about finding balance in our effort, about recognizing how deeply we are connected to everything, about understanding that emptiness is not lack but possibility, about remembering the fundamental goodness that lives in every being. You do not need to hold on to any of this tightly. You do not need to remember specific stories or particular lessons. These teachings work in you naturally, like seeds planted in fertile ground. They will grow in their own time, in their own way, without any effort on your part. The wisdom we have explored tonight has been guiding hearts toward peace for thousands of years, not because it is complicated or difficult, but because it is simple and true. These are observations about how life actually works, how suffering arises and how it can dissolve, how peace is found not by achieving something, but by recognizing what has always been here. As you rest now, let everything settle. Let your body sink deeper into whatever supports it. Let your breath find its own rhythm. Let your mind release its grip on waking thoughts. You have received something precious tonight. Not new information to carry, but a remembering of what you already knew deep down. The path continues tomorrow and all the days after. Not through striving, but through gentle awareness. Not through becoming someone different, but through recognizing who you have always been. Life itself will keep teaching you, moment by moment, if you remain open to its lessons. May you sleep deeply. May you wake with peace. May you walk through your days with the quiet knowing that wisdom is always available, always present, always waiting to be recognized in the simple reality of this moment. Sleep well,